Welcome to ReThink You, bringing you ideas, inspiration, and motivation to start living the life you were created to live. Here is your host, author, trainer, speaker, and coach, and founder of ReThink You, Kim Levings.
Well, hello there, it's Kim Levings, and welcome back to the ReThink You podcast. As you by now may have realized, we are doing a series this month of May in preparation for a panel discussion on behavioral health for those who protect and serve us, including the military and first responders. Another speaker who will be on our panel that I'm interviewing today is Jon Macaskill. He is a retired Navy SEAL commander who became a mindfulness and meditation teacher after his retirement. Jon was born in South Africa, so we share a common heritage, and he moved here with his family when he was just 7. And after serving briefly as an enlisted sailor in the Navy after high school, Jon received an appointment to the U.S. Naval Academy. Once he was in the SEALs, he served in Iraq, Afghanistan, off the coast of Somalia, and in Panama. And after retiring, Jon served as the Deputy Executive Director and podcast host and producer for Veterans Path, a nonprofit organization that works to introduce mindfulness and meditation to veterans to bring them a sense of peace, acceptance, transformation, and honor. I was blessed to meet Jon through an introduction of a great friend and business colleague. Jon is an in-demand keynote speaker, and he now speaks on developing leadership, grit, and resilience at both individual and organizational levels. Jon and his wife, Becca, who also served in the Navy and is now a physician's assistant to an orthopedic surgeon, are the proud parents of 2 with another on the way, and they currently reside right here in Colorado Springs. So what a joy to be interviewing him on Zoom. And between you and I, thanks to COVID, Jon and I have yet to meet in person, and yet we live in the same city. But I know that this is going to be a great discussion. So let's meet Jon Macaskill. Well, Jon, I've told the guests about what a wonderful person you are and all the good things that you've done. But in my normal fashion, I'd like to go back and ask you, after you've told the guests who you are, to go back and tell us a little about your early years, your school, how you adjusted to your move to the States, and also how you ended up going into the Navy. What drove that decision? So tell us a little bit about your origin story.
I love it when people call it the origin story, because I always feel like a superhero of some sort, which I'm certainly not. But I will tell you, our origin story starts in a similar spot in South Africa. So born in Cape Town, South Africa, and lived in Cape Town until I was 3, then moved to Joburg and lived in Johannesburg until I was 7. And then my family moved us to the States, my father and mother with 5 kids. So I don't know how they did it. They're brave. They were about my age then when they did that. And I can't imagine moving 5 children across the world, but they did. So I've got 3 older sisters and a younger brother, and we moved to a relatively small town of Ruston, Louisiana. My father was an architect, and he got a job teaching at Louisiana Tech University there. And my mother was a nurse and a midwife, and she got a job there. The plan was to come over, do 1 year on a working visa, and then potentially move back to South Africa. Or at least that was the plan that was told to us as young kids. But my parents had longer vision plans where they wanted to get us out of South Africa because of apartheid. They wanted to get us out of South Africa because my younger brother and I would have been potentially drafted after high school. So the joke with my dad is they got us out of South Africa to avoid the draft, and I came over here and voluntarily enlisted in the United States Navy. So as far as what brought me into the U.S. Navy, growing up in Ruston, I was part of a small, tight-knit running team, and we were, as small as we were very successful. So we were a quote-unquote elite, for at least as elite as a running team can be. And then we did absolutely everything together. We obviously trained together, we hung out together, we were in school together, ate lunch together, spent every waking moment together. Except when we were with our girlfriends. That's the one time that we weren't together. But anyhow, that made me want to be part of a very tight-knit elite group. And I had what I thought was a heart of service. So I figured I was going to enter into the US military in some shape, form, or fashion. Because of that, being a part of that cross-country track team, and being that tight-knit group and being somewhat elite, I realized that the special operations was what I wanted to be a part of, so that I could be, again, part of an elite, tight-knit group. My family used to spend the summers, or at least a portion of the summers, on the Gulf Coast, down in a place called Dauphin Island, Alabama. And I've loved the ocean. I mean, granted, that's not the ocean; it's the Gulf Coast, but still, it's still the water. I love the water. So I realized at that point that I wanted to be in the United States Navy, doing something elite on or around the water. So the SEAL teams jumped out at me, and then I started doing research on the SEAL teams. And junior or senior year, or maybe it may have been as early as sophomore year, I decided that's where I wanted to go, into the Navy SEALs. Tried to get into the Naval Academy out of high school, got turned down, but I still wanted to be a SEAL, so I enlisted in the Navy. Served for just shy of a year in the Navy, and then got picked up from the enlisted ranks to go to SEAL training. Or sorry, let me back up to the Naval Academy. Then graduated from the Naval Academy, went out to SEAL training in 2001. Had a couple of road bumps or roadblocks along the way, got rolled in a class, ended up graduating later in 2002, and ended up finally becoming a SEAL in 2003. And then from then on, served from 2003 until just last year, August of 2020. I retired from the U.S. Navy, with most of my time being in the special operations community or attached to the special operations community somehow. And then after we left the Virginia Beach area, because that's where most of my career was, my wife and I and two small kids jumped in our RV and spent the next 5.5, almost 6 months living in that RV, kind of bebopping around the country. And we've landed here in Colorado Springs, which is where we are now. And now we've got baby number 3 on the way, due next month. So that's my origin story, I guess.
That's so exciting. Thank you so much for telling us that snapshot, because, so many times, and I laugh when you said your origin story. I think it's really just saying, how did you end up doing what you're doing? Because everybody has an interesting story in their background. And I'd like to talk to you a little more about your experience during SEAL training, because I know it's one of the toughest regimes of training out there. What sort of life lessons did you take from that training that you, to this day, find still stand you in good stead?
Yeah, wow, we could be here all day with the life lessons from that training. But yeah, so I think some of the critical ones were, don't take yourself too seriously, have fun in what you're doing, and then also be focused in the moment. And I'm going to kind of speak out of both sides of my mouth here. Be focused in the moment so that you don't get consumed with the training was 6 months long. And if I looked at the entire 6 months at a time, I would be overwhelmed. So I like to break things down into much smaller, digestible chunks. And if I can live in that one moment and just get through that one event, then I was able to get through the training eventually. One event, then the next, then the next. And I think I bring that into life, is that rather than looking at the entire whatever obstacle it is that we have in our way, whatever adversity that we're facing, break it down into digestible chunks. If I can do that, then I feel like 1, it's manageable, 2, it's less stress, 3, I have more chance of success. So I think those are some of the leadership and life lessons that I came away from SEAL training with.
Those are excellent. And I think they're good life lessons for us all, Jon. So thanks for sharing that. I also know I want to backtrack a little, because I also know that you have 2 degrees, which I found interesting. One was in mathematics, but then there was also one in operations research. So talk to us about your choices of education and how those degrees have actually stood you in good stead.
Yeah. Well, this is going to be a little embarrassing, but honestly chose mathematics because I was somewhat decent at it. I didn't necessarily enjoy it as much as a lot of my colleagues or classmates did that were in that same major in undergrad. I didn't like engineering. I didn't like taking another language, and I didn't like the arts. So, by default, I kind of fell into mathematics. Looking back on it, I wish I had studied history. I wish I had studied more of the arts, and I wish I had learned a language. I learned a little bit of Spanish in high school, and one of my biggest regrets in life is not studying a language in much more depth. But I ended up being pretty decent at math, and now I like it a lot more than I did back then. And then the master's degree in operations research also almost by default got pigeonholed into that. Operations research, for those who don't know what it is basically analysis of data. I mean, that's distilling it down to the very basics. I mean, it's much more than that, but it's data analysis. So if you have a background in mathematics, it lends itself to being decent at operations research. So the Navy SEALs at the Naval Postgraduate School, a lot of them go into another curriculum called defense analysis or special operations, low intensity conflict. That's the same course. It's just two different names for the same course. And not a lot of them go into operations research, but they have spots in that course or in that curriculum. And because of my math background, the guy in charge was like, well, no, you're not going to do a defense analysis. You're not going to do the special operations low intensity conflict. You're going to go and represent the SEALs in operations research. So that's what I did. It was a massive kick in the pants. I hadn't done math in, I don't know, 7 or 8 years at that point after my undergrad going into my master's. So I had to get even with my degree in mathematics, I had to get a refresher in calculus. I had to go back through a lot of probability and statistics refresher, that kind of thing. And then having to learn how to code on a computer, that was definitely not something that I was proficient at. So it was tough, but what it has done for me, both the undergrad and my master's, have taught me to think in a different way, kind of think analytically. So I may not be dealing with numbers all the time, but I can sit back and look at a problem in a different way than somebody that may have a background in history or with a language or arts. And I'm not saying a better way, I'm just saying a different way. And if we look at problems in different ways, a lot of the time we can come up with solutions quicker. So that's what I believe my undergrad and my master's have done for me in life.
That's great, Jon, because, it's kind of like what I say, school is not necessarily to learn stuff, it's to teach you how to learn or to teach you how to think. And that example is just a great example, because so many times people get degrees and they don't see the connections, but it is just that, it's teaching the overall skills. So thank you for sharing that and allowing me to kind of backtrack a little. So now I'm going to come back into your SEAL experience. And obviously you can't go in great detail about your deployments, but it feels, when I introduced you, that you sort of transitioned after retiring from the SEALs into mindfulness and meditation. So how does you go from being a SEAL commander in active combat to running mindfulness retreats? There seems like a huge story in that timeline. So talk us through some of your experiences and how you ended up doing what you're doing now.
Sure. Yeah. It goes back to my first deployment, my first real deployment, combat deployment to Afghanistan in 2005. We were there. I was attached to SEAL Team 10. I wasn't actually part of SEAL Team 10, but I was attached to SEAL Team 10. And they were there in Bagram, Afghanistan. And there was an operation called Operation Red Wings, which many of your listeners or viewers may have heard of. That's the lone survivor operation with Marcus Luttrell and Michael Murphy. Michael Murphy ended up getting killed in that operation, was the Medal of Honor recipient for his heroic actions on the battlefield. And along with Michael Murphy, we lost another 2 guys on the ground, and then ended up losing an entire helicopter of men from both the SEALs and the Army Night Stalkers, for a total loss that day of 19 people. And I was involved in that operation indirectly, in that I was in the operations center. So I was monitoring the phones and the communications back from those on the battlefield. And then Murph and Danny Dietz and all those guys, we were all friends. And then losing those guys caused me a lot of questions as to why I survived and they didn't. Why did they go on that operation? I didn't. Why did somebody who didn't have children survive when some of those men had children? Some of them had wives, and there was basically survivor's guilt is what it boils down to. I didn't understand that at the time. I pushed through trying to arrange the recovery efforts and rescue efforts. So recovery of the bodies, those who had passed, and then the rescue efforts of Marcus Luttrell, because he was the lone survivor on the ground and he was lost at the time. We didn't know where he was. So I spent a lot of time spending my energy on that and not really focusing on what was going on with me. And ended up flying home with escorting Murph and Danny Dietz back to the States, their remains back to the States, and landed in Dover, Delaware, met with Murph's parents who were there, and then got in a rental car, and drove back to Virginia Beach. And I did not drive home. I drove home, or rather I drove to go see Danny Dietz's now widow and present her with the flag that was draped over his body when he was pulled from the battlefield. And, spent some time consoling her as much as one can in that time. And then went home to my then wife. We've since divorced and I've remarried, but my then wife, and I acted like nothing had happened, acted like I hadn't been gone, acted like this event had not happened. We hadn't lost men on the battlefield. I hadn't lost friends, and there was no survivor guilt. I acted like that because that's what I thought I was supposed to do. I thought that I was supposed to press on and start focusing on the next mission, the next deployment, the next platoon that I was starting to develop. And that cost me dearly. It cost me personally. It cost me a marriage. And I think, honestly, there were some underlying things there as well, but definitely did not help that I was battling with what I was battling. And then I went into some deep depression and anxiety and stress through my career, and ended up being put on different medications to deal with that. And that helped to a point. But what it did was also numb any enjoyment that I had in life. And that caused me to go down some even darker thoughts of, okay, well, I'm not enjoying life. I'm not hurting as bad as I was, but I'm not enjoying it. So what's the point? And went back to counseling, and one of the counselors recommended that I try something alternative. And he recommended practicing mindfulness and meditation, or practicing meditation and living mindfully. And I laughed at him. And I was like, I don't know what kind of snake oil you're trying to sell me here, but do you understand what I do for a living? I can't be telling my buddies that I'm meditating, or that I've turned into some hippie or monk or something. And he's like, well, that's not it at all. And then he reframed it and said, hey, you know what? What if I was to give you something that would help you to perform better as a SEAL, mentally and physically? And I was like, hell yeah, sign me up for whatever that is. Because as a SEAL or as a type A personality, period, you're always looking for an edge. And as a SEAL specifically, or a special operator specifically, you're looking for an edge over your enemy, or you're looking for an edge over your buddy right next to you. You always want to be the best. And I was like, yeah, whatever that is, I want to do. And it was like, well, funny enough, it's meditation and living mindfully. So it's the same thing. So I was like, okay, well, since you framed it that way, I'll try it out. So I tried it out for a few weeks, and then wasn't getting the long-term lasting effects that I thought I was going to get after 2 weeks, and went back to him. It's like, Doc, I told you that stuff is not going to work. And he's like, well, you've only been doing it for 2 weeks. That's like going to the gym for 2 weeks and thinking that you're going to come out looking like Arnold Schwarzenegger, or it's like lining up to run a marathon on day one. You can't do it. You have to work your way up to it. So I went back, started meditating regularly for about another 6 to 8 weeks after that. And then I started to notice that my performance was improving. I was communicating better. I was feeling better at work. I was feeling better at home. I was feeling more fulfilled. But then I thought, well, maybe that's just a placebo effect. And then others started coming up to me saying, hey, you know what? What are you doing differently? Because you're communicating better. You're starting to look better. Like I didn't have the dark bags under my eyes. I was just doing different. I was doing things differently. So at first I was a little hesitant to tell them that I was meditating, because I thought that I would get the reception that I had given the counselor. And I was like, you know what, I'm just going to take a risk here and tell them what I've been doing, because I have been receiving the benefits. So I told them, and to a person, every single person that I told, instead of them turning around and never talking to me again because they thought that I was some kind of weirdo, they asked me, oh yeah, how did you get into that? Tell me more about it. And so I started telling people, and then we started doing little small meditation sessions at work together, like nothing big, like 4 or 5, sometimes up to 15 minutes with 4 or 5 people. It was just small, but they all started to do it on their own, and then they started to benefit from it. And then I realized, you know what, this is something I should bring to other people, because of my background, I'm able to bring it to other people who may not normally be open to it. So that's what I did. And I did research on it, found out how to get certified in different forms of it. And here I am now as a mindfulness and meditation teacher, both to help individuals improve their performance. That's normally how I couch it or frame it for some folks, because again, they're probably not going to be open to it if I walk in and tell them, hey, I want to teach you to meditate so that you can deal with stress and anxiety and depression. Some folks don't want to admit that they have that. Some people just want that edge. So I frame it that way for some. And then for some who are open and vulnerable and sharing that they are dealing with some adversity or some obstacles and are experiencing some stress and anxiety, some depression, then I teach them as well. And it's really been life-changing, not only for those that I've been teaching, but for me to know that I am benefiting others with the lessons that I've learned. So I get a great sense of purpose out of what I'm doing now. So that's what's brought me to here.
Wow, thank you for sharing that with us, Jon. It's powerful. And I mean, I know the impact of being mindful and the practice of meditation. Can you share with us any breakthroughs that you've had? Because you've been doing this for a few years now. So if you have any specific stories to illustrate the impact, because I love what you said about how you frame it with the veterans. And, my listeners would have heard the interview with Dr. Springer, where she talks about this survivor guilt and also that pride factor that people don't want to admit that they're suffering from issues. So I think it's really key how you position that and how you introduce it to them. But tell us some stories of just the success you've had, because I know you've had successes.
Sure. Well, I mean, I'll start small. First off, I'm thrilled that you and Doc Springer are connected and that you've interviewed her. Her book is fantastic, and I see that she's got this new second extended version out, and it's doing really well already, just in pre-order. So I'll give Doc Springer a quick plug there. But as far as successes, I think the one that I want to celebrate the most is just my being present with my family. And I really noticed it when I was initially, my daughter was, 3-4 weeks old, and I would get up in the middle of the night to feed her after, hearing her, and it was my turn. My wife had, and I had some type of rotation basis set up. And I would go through to feed her and have her in my arms, this little beautiful miracle, my first child, 3 or 4 weeks old. And I would have a bottle and I'd put it in her mouth. And as soon as that was done, as she's still there, making noises and cooing and, touching my hand and everything else, I wouldn't even be aware of it. I would be thinking about what I had to do the next day, what I had to do the next week, what I had screwed up the day before. And sometimes I would even, this is terrible to admit, but sometimes I would even bring my phone in there and scroll through my email at 2, 3 in the morning, scroll through my email, through my social media, whatever the case may be. And then when she would be finished with her bottle, take the bottle, I'd put her back in her crib, and then I would go lay back in my bed thinking that I'd fall back asleep, but I wouldn't. I would just stew over what I had started my mind racing on. And then and that's about the time that I got introduced to meditation. More formally. I tried it in the past, but really formally tried to make a big time effort here. And so about 2 months later, so my baby girl is about 3 months old now, and still getting up in the middle of the night to feed her. And I would go through there. One, I wouldn't be upset with the fact that my little baby was hungry in the morning. I mean, that's a natural thing. Whereas before, I'd say, to myself, which is incredibly embarrassing to admit, but I would have a little bit of anger, maybe not anger, but frustration. And now I would just be like, hey, this is a great opportunity for me to sit with my baby girl in the middle of the night when nothing else is going on. And I would feed her, and I would pay attention to those noises. And I would pay attention to her little hands reaching up and grabbing my hands. And nothing else would be on my mind, just her right there, right then. And then I would take her and put her back in her crib, and I would go back to bed, and I would fall asleep because I wasn't stewing about all this other stuff. And so because I was falling asleep, I wasn't as tired at work. And because I wasn't as tired at work, I was able to perform better. So that was, I say it's a small victory, but honestly, I think it's one of life's big victories, is to be able to enjoy your child, the miracle that is your child. And then since then, my daughter's 4 years old now. So I've been practicing regularly for about 4 years. And since then, I've found more fulfillment with my family. I found more fulfillment at work. I found more fulfillment in myself, just alone in the quiet time. I can enjoy this human experience rather than if I'm, a quiet time before. If there was a quiet time, I'd say, what can I be doing? What can I be doing? Always on the move, always wanting to get that next thing done. And I still have a lot going on in my mind and in my life, and I want to accomplish those things. But I also understand that there's times to just be quiet and to just be. So I think those are my victories that I celebrate.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that that's so powerful, because you led me to ask another question, but let me frame it up in that, as just such a great illustration, because I think a lot of parents could identify with what you're saying, that it's the reframing. Then instead of getting frustrated and feeling that it's annoying having to get up and feed the child, and being able to just be fully present with her. Talk to me a little in terms of your understanding of what it means to be mindful, because I think not everybody has a clear understanding of it and may sort of slap their own label on it, which is what our brains do. It's going to try and fit it into something you already know. So I'd love it if you just took a couple minutes and explained it from your perspective. What does it mean to be more mindful?
Sure. Well, we've all heard the saying, situational awareness or presence or focus. And those are all synonymous with being mindful. I mean, you are aware of the here and the now, the present moment, what you're experiencing physically. So what it is you're seeing, what it is you're smelling, tasting, feeling, whatever. And then what it is you're feeling emotionally as well. So if you're experiencing sadness, you're just with it. You don't try to change it and you don't try to judge it. You're just with that emotion. You're with that experience. If you're experiencing joy, experiencing whatever the case may be, you are aware of that emotion. So mindfulness is really just being intentionally aware or paying attention intentionally of the here and now without any judgment. And where there's a lot of confusion or misnomers is that people think mindfulness is meditation, and they think meditation is mindfulness. And the way that I describe it is, because I'm a math guy and an operations research guy, I use Venn diagrams. And so, excuse me, what I imagine is mindfulness in this circle of the Venn diagram and meditation in this circle of the Venn diagram. And there's some overlap between the two, and they definitely complement one another. Meditation is a practice where you formally sit or take some time to formally lay down, or you can even do a standing meditation, but it's a formal practice where you're setting aside time to practice. Mindfulness, on the other hand, is a way of being. You can mindfully eat. You can mindfully have a conversation. I mean, the conversation that I'm having with you right now, I'm paying attention to the questions that you're asking, paying attention to the conversation that we're having, rather than thinking about what is happening later today, rather than thinking about what happened earlier this morning. I'm focused in the here and now. So I'm being mindful with you here. You can be mindful in your spending, right? I mean, that's probably a good place to be very mindful in what it is you're spending your money on. But as you practice meditation, the ability to be more mindful in your life is greatly increased. So you pay more attention to the here and now. You're more focused, and it's much easier to do that as you practice meditation. The reason that happens is because as you meditate, a lot of time you'll hear people say, I can't meditate. I don't know how to meditate. I can't meditate because my mind is too busy. Well, that's a blessing. One, your mind is supposed to be thinking thoughts. But when you sit down to meditate, when you have an anchor, so you're focused on your breathing, you're focused on some mantra, whatever the case may be, when you sit down to meditate and you notice that your mind has wandered off, when you notice that, and then you bring it back to that anchor, again, your breath, the mantra, whatever that anchor may be, as you bring it back over and over and over, that's like mental repetitions in the gym. And that is literally rewiring your brain to be more focused on the here and now. So that's where the complementary side of mindfulness and meditation come, is they actually support one another. As you live more mindfully, it becomes easier to meditate. As you meditate more often, it becomes easier to live more mindfully. And then you start enjoying things. You start noticing the little things, like my daughter, her hands reaching up and grabbing mine, or the sounds that she was making. Or you notice as you're walking to and from work, you notice other people as human beings rather than just other objects in this world. So you can be more compassionate. So there's numerous benefits to practicing meditation and then living mindfully. But that's probably a lot longer explanation to your question, or an answer to your question, than you had anticipated. But that's what I see as mindfulness and living mindfully, and what meditation is, and then how they complement one another.
A very good explanation. Thank you. Don't apologize for going long. That's exactly what I was hoping for. Because you're right, there was a lot of misunderstanding out there. And as you were speaking, I'm reminded almost of a metaphor that I often use, Jon, saying it's almost like you're dialing up the volume of your sensitivity. So it's like if you keep, or my pastor uses the term dimmer switch, if you keep hitting the dimmer switch, and so it's about raising that awareness and tuning into the world around you. So it's sort of increasing your sensitivity. And of course, in my work as a thinking coach, I'm always talking about your choices, and your choices are made with intentionality or reactionary, and taking back intentions, taking back charge. Talk to me a little bit about, maybe if you could think about who was your toughest nut to crack. No names. I think it's amusing as you shared your own story about how resistant some of the veterans can be to these alternative treatments. But, I'm sure you do have a story of somebody who came in really resistant, who was difficult to convince, and ultimately felt the benefit.
Ooh. Yeah, I don't know if they've ultimately felt the benefit yet, because I think some of those cases I'm still trying to crack. I mean, my wife is one of them. I love my wife dearly, obviously, and she supports me in what I'm doing, and she's seen the change in who I am and how I am. But she tells me that her meditation is working out, and I believe that there's definitely benefits to physical activity, but I don't think that meditation is the same thing. I don't think that working out in the gym is meditation. Still working on cracking that. I think I've got, she's pregnant, and she's gonna have our third child next month, or early June, so late May or early June. And I think when we have 3 little rugrats running around the house, she's going to need meditation, because I think getting to the gym is probably going to happen less. And so I think that might be when I am able to convince her to just take some breaths and focus on the here and now and de-stress that way. But yeah, funny enough, I think the hardest nut to crack is my beautiful bride.
Well, that's great. Thank you for that transparency. I hope Becca doesn't mind us talking about her. So perhaps you could share a story then, just a success story, of somebody that you've worked with and how it's impacted them. And the veterans that you're working with, are they all out of active duty, or are you also working with those who are still engaged in active duty?
I work with both. I was with an organization called Veterans Path. And Veterans Path was teaching mindfulness and meditation initially exclusively to veterans, so those who have hung up the uniform. And now they've moved to working with veterans and service members who are still active, and they're doing amazing work. Now I'm doing that on my own, and I am doing it with veterans and service members. And I don't formally go out and run retreats for 10 service members or 10 veterans. I just do a lot of virtual retreats, and veterans come and service members come, or I do virtual programs where people can sign up for 21-day mindfulness experiences, or I've got a portion of the deliberate discomfort 60-day deliberate discomfort challenge, which is a physical side, a mental side, a spiritual side, everything else. And a lot of, and that's virtual, it's pre-recorded content of me speaking and talking through meditations and mindfulness and how to live mindfully. And that's kind of the adjustment that I've had to make, or that many of us have had to make in this day and age, right? Shifting from in-person retreats to doing everything virtually. So a lot of my stuff is virtual or already recorded content, but then I get the feedback from individuals who have gone through it and how life-changing it has been. And I even run a small podcast with a buddy of mine. We come from very different backgrounds. He is a single guy living in New York City, hippie. I am a married guy with children, retired Navy SEAL. And we've come together for this show called Men Talking Mindfulness. And we bring people on to talk about different aspects of living mindfully, different aspects of meditation, everything from yoga. We had Dan Nevins. Dan Nevins is a double amputee. He was on last week. He's a yoga instructor now, and he had a phenomenal episode with him. And next week we're talking about mindfulness and sex, which is a little crazy. We're going to be talking about sex on LinkedIn. But anyway, the whole thing is that men talking mindfulness, people have told us how much that has changed their lives, because it's opened up their eyes to these practices. Again, my buddy is a hippie. I'm the retired SEAL. So some people wouldn't listen to Will, my buddy, because he's a hippie. Some people wouldn't listen to me because I'm a SEAL. But because we come together, we were opening up some minds that normally wouldn't be open to it. So I think I don't know that I can necessarily pin 5 or 6 exact successes, but there's probably several hundred people who have contacted me, Will, the Mission 60 Deliberate Discomfort Challenge, the mindfulness experience that I'm doing with partner Teresa Larson, former Marine. The people have come out and said, hey, this changed my life, or you're being open to this opened up my eyes and has changed my life. So Yeah, I think that's where I'm seeing that positive effect, or that positive dent that I'm putting in the universe, I guess, like Steve Jobs said.
No, absolutely, John. Great. And I think you are creating a movement and a shift in the tide. That deliberate discomfort, I'd love to know more about it, but I know we're coming up on time. So I did want to say, um, would you say that that's tied also to resilience, being able to get more comfortable and bounce back from challenges? Is that some of the construct behind deliberate discomfort?
Yeah, absolutely, it is. It's about resilience, and grit is a big part of it. And again, Venn diagrams, there's there's some overlap between resilience and grit. But yeah, the grit piece is that it's 60 days, and it's very tough. And to commit to a goal and then actually get through that goal, that's where the grit is built up. And then by looking back on that as a success, and then developing the resources around yourself, you're developing your resilience, so your ability to bounce back. So absolutely 100%, the deliberate discomfort, the book itself, the masterclass that's associated with it, the challenge, it's all about developing leadership, developing grit, and developing resilience. And I mean, I can also talk about how mindfulness and meditation, those two alone help with developing grit and resilience. I mean, sitting down to meditate, committing to a meditation practice, an individual practice, one, and then a long-term practice, two, that takes grit. But then it also, because it develops your brain and rewires your brain, it helps you to be more resilient in life. So it's kind of a win-win. The challenge is great, and then mindfulness and meditation are also great in developing those aspects of life.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'm sure that people will go and Google that. Is there a website that they can go? Because as we come into the close, I was going to say, tell people how they can connect with you and some of these programs, Jon.
Sure. They are all listed right now on my link tree, which I've rebranded to be jonmacaskill.com/links. And that will take you to the Deliberate Discomfort Challenge. It'll take you to the Men Talking Mindfulness podcast. It'll take you to the mindfulness experience that I'm doing with Teresa. So yeah, that's probably the easiest link. And it has all my social media handles on it too. So jonmacaskill.com/links.
Perfect. Thank you. That makes it easier, right? You don't have to give this laundry list of all your handles. Right.
Yeah.
So, Jon, this has been a great conversation, but is there anything else that you'd like to share, or something that you'd like to talk about that I didn't ask you before we close? We have a few minutes still.
Sure. No, I think you've covered a lot of great questions. I normally what I try to wrap things up with is just the compassion piece, and I touched on that earlier. Is if we can all have more compassion for one another, understand that we're all human beings, we're all experiencing our own trials and adversity and obstacles, and if we can just do that, then we're going to change the world for the better. If we just see one another as human beings. So I just ask, I guess it's not so much something I want to discuss, but something that I want to ask of your audience is just take a second, breathe. Next time you want to curse somebody out or think of them as a jerk, think of them as a human being and understand what it is they're going through. And that's gonna change your life, and then it's gonna change their life as well. So that's really all I have to say.
Great, Jon. Well, thank you so much. This has been such a pleasure. And I know that on the panel, we'll unpack a little more in terms of everything that's going on for veterans and first responders. So I look forward to having you on that. So
Absolutely.
Thanks again.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, Kim.